No. Yes, spare them. Say that.
As Guyana sits on the economic and political crossroads, we speak to the nation's opinion leaders and decision makers to get their views on the challenges the country faces and the path it must take to achieve national development. Welcome to Nation Watch. Now here is your host Mervyn Williams, former member of the Guyana Parliament.
It's October 22nd, 2023. The countdown is on to Christmas as it is to look to regional and national elections. Thank you very much for joining us for Nation Watch today. And we have for you the promise of a very interesting and educational conversation. I will present my guest to you in a short while, but before we do, there's a little bit of information we need to share with you. So we go for a short break immediately and we bring that information to you.
An oldies dance on Saturday, October 28th at Congress Place, Sophia. Come, let's party from 8 p.m. Featuring Blue Ribbon the Boss and Genesis One Man Band. Admission $1,000. Let's party to a well-stocked bar and finger foods. For more information, call 608-6845. It's an oldies dance, Saturday, October 28th, Congress Place, Sophia. See you there. PNCR presents an oldies dance on Saturday, October 28th at Congress Place, Sophia. Come, let's party from 8 p.m. Featuring Blue Ribbon the Boss and Genesis One Man Band. Admission $1,000. Let's party to a well-stocked bar and finger foods. For more information, call 608-6845. It's an oldies dance, Saturday, October 28th, Congress Place, Sophia. See you there. PNCR presents.
Thank you very much for staying with us. Today we're going to be discussing the Guyana-Venezuela border controversy, and I present to you my guest, Ambassador Ronald Austin, CCH, who has served Guyana well for more than maybe 40 years in the
About 40
in the field of international relations. Ambassador Austin has served as, among other things, ambassador to China and more recently, head of the Foreign Service Institute at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's now, I believe, retired, sir. Welcome, Mr. Austin.
Retired in a sense.
Retired in a sense. I like that. I don't think diplomats are ever retired.
That is true.
But I want to thank you very much, sir, for joining me here on Nation Watch today. This issue that we're going to discuss is not only topical, but it is one that I believe requires the attention of every citizen of this country and requires a national program to educate our people with respect to the history and the outlook as we go forward dealing with this matter as it is now engaging the attention of the International Court of Justice?
If I may,
Sure.
I think I do hope that once you've started this exercise, the party, and by extension the government of Ghana, has a moral and political obligation to ensure that there's a continuous education program about the border controversy we have with Venezuela. For the simple reason that the border controversy presents an existential crisis or challenge to this country. And every single Guyanese must understand this issue from its beginning, its evolution, and to the current stage of which you're at. It's not a question of having an academic or a superficial understanding of what is going on. This matter affects us politically, it affects us economically, and it affects us culturally, as you can see, with the influx of the Venezuelan refugees into Ghana. So I've always been troubled over the years by the fact that we start an educational exercise on this matter, and then we stop. We had a very comprehensive program in the 80s, and that came to an end somewhere after 1992. I think the education or the public relations side of this matter was revived recently with Kit Nascimento and I think Royal Johnson. But it seems to have come to a very premature end. I do not think that is good for this country because, on the other hand, Venezuela does not pause in its persistent claim to this country. And that claim permeates every segment of the Venezuelan society. It starts in the schools, it's in the universities. I've counted over about 50 to 100 theses written by Venezuelans and non-Venezuelans on the border controversy. So for them, it's a very serious question. And I think correspondingly on our side, I don't think we're as committed or as aggressive or robust in our educational pursuit of this matter. So I'm very happy this morning that you've started this exercise, and I hope it represents a continuous and programmatic effort on the part of the party. The government ought to do the same thing, but then again, I'm fortunately not part of the government.
Thank you very much. The Venezuelans have been persistent. Within recent times, there have been official statements out of Venezuela that there's a military operation close to the border with Guyana in a northwestern region. And they have contended in their statement that the purpose of their mission is to root out illegal mining operations. In the meantime, Guyanese citizens who traverse the waterways, the only means of transportation, have reportedly been intercepted, arrested, and detained by Venezuelan military. And the situation is becoming really, really difficult out there. The business operations in Iterengbang have ground to a virtual halt. We received unconfirmed reports that policemen who have been assigned to the police station at Iterengbang have gone absent without leave. We're not hearing anything from the government to either confirm or deny these reports. We do have, however, a video coming out from the Venezuelan military which tell us exactly what the mission is. And this, I do not know if the government of Guyana is paying attention to it, but certainly the citizens of Guyana are, and it does not present a very comforting picture. We'll show you that video, and I have an unofficial translation which I'll share with you as the video is being played.
Nos encontramos a bordo del Tango 92, dando inicio al despliegue operacional de la red marítima insular en el marco de la Operación Roraima 2023, Frente Efectivo. Más de 150 hombres se despliegan hoy, día hacia el Frente Efectivo, hacia Punta Barima, para iniciar el posicionamiento la toma de las bases de protección fronteriza que le corresponden a la red marítima insular y dar cumplimiento a esa instrucción de nuestro comandante jefe, presidente
More than
constitucional
150
Nicolás
men
Maduro
are
Moro,
deployed today
de iniciar
towards Punta
las
Barima
labores
to establish position and to take possession of maritime networks in order to protect the base that corresponds to the same maritime networks and comply with instructions from our commander and President Nicolas Maduro Moro to initiate protective labor to recover the territory which through history, by tradition, by law, always belonged to Venezuela. We will never allow the provision of El Essequibo because the son of Venezuela was born in El Essequibo. The greatest army of Operation Roraima, El Essequibo, because the son of Venezuela was born in El Essequibo. And it goes on to say, and where are we headed to? El Essequibo, to triumph, to triumph, to triumph. This is an unofficial translation of what the military officer from Venezuela has been saying in that video. I do not know if the government of Guyana has seen this video and has heard what is being uttered by this gentleman. Certainly, we do not get a sense that the government of Guyana has exhibited any level of urgency in dealing with the situation. I recall, Ambassador Austin, that in the early 2000s, Venezuela had actually blown up a couple of pontoons in Guyana's territory while contending that unlawful mining was taking place in Venezuela. And again, the same People's Progressive Party was in government and took absolutely no steps to secure the livelihood or the safety and well-being of Guyanese citizens. What is your reaction, sir, to what you just saw and heard?
Let us back up a bit. And again, I commend you for engaging in this exercise, doing this educational program for the Guyanese people. We tend to focus too often, too exclusively on the diplomatic side, where we have competed effectively with the Venezuelans in the different multilateral fora, here in the region with CARICOM and so forth. Right now, the case is before the ICJ, and it's clear the Venezuelans are encountering a level of discomfort as the case is being heard at the World Court. What we tend to ignore is what is happening on the ground. There have now been reports about the Venezuelans virtually dominating the Cayuni for decades, as long as I've been in the Foreign Service. You can always find a miner who had to fly the Venezuelan flag to use the Cayuni, or who's had his camp destroyed by they said it's sindicatos or the Venezuelan members of the Venezuelan army. Now, what is good about that video is that commander, or the person speaking in that video, is saying quite clearly, he's not dealing with mining. He's there to take back the Essequibo on behalf of Venezuela. Now, these are not matters you can treat lightly, and I think it's good that you raise the question as to whether the government is really pursuing this with the vigor that they ought to. All I've read really recently is that the head of the army might have visited the area.
Yes, I read that as well. Although that is unofficial as well.
Yes, I've read that the government is studying the matter based on what they've seen on the media. I worry because something like that should have been reported directly from Ettering Bang, I assume, or also from Caracas, where we have an embassy. Granted, there is no ambassador in place right now, but a government should not depend on the social media for information to deal with a question as massive and as significant as this. That is very worrisome. And as you suggested a moment ago, with the blowing up of the pontoons, as far as I can recollect, there was no response. And what I'm seeing here in relation to this buildup of Venezuelan troops on the border is a series of disconnected activity. There is no comprehensive plan or program to deal with it, whether it's on the diplomatic side, followed by the military side, followed by mobilization of public opinion that is telling the Guyanese people exactly what is going on. So as we speak here talking about this critical issue this morning, I don't think the average citizen can tell you precisely what is happening on the border. What that average citizen knows is that there's something significant is going on, and they're just guessing as to what the import is. As I mentioned to you, I've seen at least 2 videos done by residents, I think, of Region 7, where the thrust of their presentation was how powerful the Venezuelan army appeared to them. I do not think that kind of mental image of the Venezuelan army is in the best interest of this country. You know, I don't know what is happening at Etteringbang. I got activities virtually come to a halt there, and I don't know how strong is our presence there at Etteringbang or in the nearby areas.
Yeah. I'm not sure that there's any level of strength based on what we've been reading, sir. A few weeks ago, there was an article in the national newspapers regarding Guyana Defense Force soldiers being in a boat traveling along the borders in Region 7 with civilians. And they, according to that report, I recall, they came under fire.
Yeah.
And they came under fire from what was reportedly a criminal gang operating out of Venezuela. And the fire seemed to have emanated from the Venezuelan side. So with all of this happening, and we get almost a thunderous silence from the government, how does that impact the confidence of the citizenry that we are on the right path?
You know, I had a rather, what should I say? What is the best word I can use to describe it is, we were interviewing an officer in the Ministry for Promotion, and the interview is being done at the Public Service Commission. And that young officer was asked, what would you do to help Guyana deal with the border controversy with Venezuela in its different aspects, military, political, economic, and so on. And to my horror, the response was, we might as well concede because they're stronger than we are. I say this to try to respond to the question you just posed, is that if you allow the residents in those adjoining areas, Region 7, 2,
And 1.
and 1, to get the impression that the Venezuelans can go and blow up pontoons, get rid of mining, some of our miners. Our miners are dependent on buying petrol. They have to go across, I think, the Cuyuni to the other side to buy petrol. In each case, the Venezuelan army and the representatives, they conceal them, of the government of Venezuela, seem to be in a position of great strength. That allied with the prominence of, and the presence of the army in the area is having a negative psychological impact in that particular area. And I don't know if you recall, certainly the 70s and the 80s and into the 90s, we had what was called a border policy. That is, you had special programs for like 7 and 1. And the officers in that particular region might not be military officers, but just political operatives who would pass information back to the center, both the government, the army, and all relevant agencies. And they developed programs which would help the government to respond immediately to any kind of major activity in those areas. The border policy doesn't exist anymore. So you don't have any kind of effective monitoring or analyzing of what is going on there. So there can be a response because most of the people at the center who have to take the decisions barely know what is going on in those areas.
I reflect on what you said about the young officer who was up for promotion and the interview. And I must tell you that I'm not altogether surprised by the response, because no less a person than former President Jagdeo himself had suggested publicly that maritime access be granted to Venezuela through, that we grant them space to traverse through our waters. I mean, it is the most ridiculous suggestion I've heard.
It is good that you raise this question, because something which bothers me, and I'm right now reviewing my 40, 50 years in the Foreign Service, and the Foreign Ministry, for example, has suffered from a kind of institutional rot, because when I went back in 2015, quite clearly the ministry was when it was in a state of decline, and Foreign Minister Greenidge had to laboriously try to reconstitute the ministry in so many areas. I'm saying this to tell you that what happens is, because the institution has been in a state of stop and go, one government departs, the incoming government decides it's going to break down everything it has found in the ministry. When I came back here in '93, it was really heartrending to see documents being destroyed, being shipped from the ministry to the furnace to be burnt. Anything to do with Mr. Burnham was thrown out. And what happened in the process is that we missed a lot. We missed, for example, when Carlos Andres Perez came here in 1978, he recognized, a much more intelligent man than most of the other succeeding Venezuelan presidents. He recognized he could not get 5/8, and he asked Mr. Burnham for a symbolic cession, a corridor to the Atlantic. Mr. Burnham, I was a young officer taking notes at that meeting, and Mr. Burnham's response was, "Cap, giving away land is like committing adultery. If you do it once, you're going to come back for some more." As a joke, but Mr. Burnham immediately put an end to that discussion. If what Cap was asking in '78 had informed what Mr. Jagdeo knew whenever he made that unfortunate statement, he would not have made it. Because the moment you make a concession to Venezuela in any area, that will not be the end of the matter.
Let us examine how we got where we are, if I may, Mr. Austin. There was the Washington Treaty of 1897, which mapped the way forward and resulted in the 1899 Paris Arbitral Tribunal, which, for all intents and purposes, fully and finally settled this frontier issue between Guyana and Venezuela. Walk us through that tribunal process and give us a sense of how it arrived at its outcome.
Okay, let me try and do it as quickly as I can. Give you a quick review. As I remember it, there was some suggestion that there are problems on where British Guyana was situated and where Venezuela, which became independent in, I think, around about 1841, if I remember precisely. And there's a question of the boundary, and the British government sent in the man Schomburg, who he did a map of the area. I came up with a boundary, and that was 1844 or 1846. Then the question, there was a gold shout in 1895, and the Venezuelans got very anxious about, where the gold was, and if it was in Guyana, they wanted the border the boundary to be, that area to be part of Venezuela. And they're the ones who really leaned hard on the Americans to intervene on their behalf against the British. The British at the time was regarded as one of the most powerful entities in international relations because it was an empire. So they brought the Americans in, and the Americans decided to based on the Monroe Doctrine, to tell the British, look, you better settle this question. The British held out for a while and eventually conceded, and they signed the Treaty of Washington in 1897. That treaty laid the foundation for the arbitral award of 1899. And that treaty said that what that arbitral award decided would be a full, final, and perfect settlement of all issues referred to it. Venezuela accepted that. It accepted the demarcation of the boundary between the two countries in 1905. And not until 1962, at the United Nations, it decided, based on the Malé Provost letter which he left to be published posthumously, that they were going to revive the claim to the Essequibo, based on their view that the 1899 award was null and void.
But in 1905, there was a reaffirmation by Venezuela
Yes.
to the final document which was issued by the Paris Arbitral Tribunal, the final settlement. After 57 years, Venezuela found it convenient to conclude that the arbitral award was null and void. Is there anything outside of this now infamous letter that was left behind that informed such a claim?
Yes, but well, we live in a funny country. We have a man in this country who is an expert in this matter and who's written two of the best works on the question of the border controversy. I refer, of course, to my colleague and friend, Cedric Joseph. What Joseph has pointed out is that when Venezuela revived the claim in 1962, it was a coinciding of the interests of two countries, Venezuela on one hand and the United States on the other. And that was aimed at Dr. Jagan. That the Americans were very concerned. Dr. Jagan had gone to Washington in 1962, and the Kennedy administration had concluded that had he become the prime minister, but then he would become too close to the Russians in an area that was regarded as American backyard. Betancourt was in Caracas at the time as president. And Kennedy went, after Jagan went to the White House in October 1962, Kennedy visited Betancourt. And the suggestion is that he told, or suggested to the President Betancourt, we would rather not have Cheddi Jagan as the Premier of Guyana. So why don't you come up with something to make sure that he's not elected or become the Premier or the Prime Minister of Guyana. And it's not very long after that, in 1962, that at the United Nations, that question, Venezuela revived the question. So it was not just the Malé Provost letter, but also these geopolitical factors influencing the Venezuelans to renew the claim. Cedric Joseph, in a book which is still the most outstanding work on the issue, it's over 600 pages. It's called Anglo-American Diplomacy and the Revival of the Border Controversy between Guyana and Venezuela. 600 pages, but he deals extensively with this question as to why the Americans virtually aided the Venezuelans to renew the claim.
We'll pause for a moment here and we'll bring that bit of information to you again for the event taking place at Congress Place on Sunday, 28th October 2023.
That's next Sunday.
Yeah.
On Saturday, October 28th at Congress Place, Sophia. Come, let's party from 8 p.m. Featuring Blue Ribbon the Boss and Genesis One Man Band. Admission $1,000. Let's party to a well-stocked bar and finger foods. For more information, call 608-6845. It's an oldies dance, Saturday, October 28th, Congress Place, Sophia. See you there. PNCR presents an oldies dance on Saturday, October 28th at Congress Place, Sophia. Come, let's party from 8 p.m. featuring Blue Ribbon the Boss and Genesis One Man Band. Admission $1,000. Let's party to a well-stocked bar and finger foods. For more information, call 608-6845. It's an oldies dance, Saturday, October 28th, Congress Place of Fire. See you there. PNCR.
Thank you very much for staying with us. We are discussing the Venezuela-Guyana border controversy, and my guest is Ambassador Ronald Austin, CCH. Yes, sir, you will.
Yeah, I want to add to what I've just said. A very important dimension to Venezuela's diplomacy that we tend to ignore. We ignore it at our peril. Venezuela's always had ambitions in the Caribbean. Let me try and walk you through some of them.
Bird Island, I believe.
Well,
was
they
one
have
of
Bird
those.
Island.
Yeah,
Despite advice to the contrary,
yeah.
you know, we knew Venezuela had designs on Bird Island, and we always resisted it through different ways, by talking to the bigger countries and so on. But go back to 1945. They wanted Aruba and all adjoining Caribbean states to be part of Venezuela. They started Petrocaribe.
Yes.
Good in a way, but it also a great instrument to influence the smaller countries in the Caribbean. I can tell you that this time around, when I was back in the foreign ministry and the border controversy came up with the Caribbean heads and other Caribbean officials, it was not as easy this time around as previously to get them to not automatically, but to support Guyana in a direct way. They would hide behind the general statement by the CARICOM Secretariat, but individually, it was a different matter. And Venezuela knows this very well. I was in St. Lucia. I think it was in 1990 or thereabouts when a Venezuelan gunboat turned up in the harbor, and the impact was something that you had to see to believe. You know, and I would suggest, because I've discovered that so few, even of our senior officials, read Dr. Williams's The Threat to the Caribbean Community by Venezuela. Well, it's not in the title, but in the body of the speech, what the threat of Venezuela poses to Guyana. We tend to forget in that mixed commission, Venezuela proposed in that mixed commission the joint development of the Essequibo.
Precisely.
Williams said that if you looked at it carefully, it was a transparent attempt to take over the entire Essequibo.
That's exactly where I want to take. I'm looking at Article 1 of the Geneva Agreement here. And this is number 8192, and it's dated 17 February 1966. Article 1 says, and I quote, "A mixed commission shall be established with the task of seeking satisfactory solutions for the practical settlement of the controversy between Venezuela and the United Kingdom, which has arisen as a result of Venezuelans' contention that the arbitral award of 1899 about the frontier between British Guyana and Venezuela is null and void." A number of years were spent pursuing this matter through I believe it's the UN Good Officer process, yielding absolutely no results. The government of Guyana, a few years ago under President Granger, decided that a juridical settlement is what is required. And so the matter is now before the International Court of Justice. You're part of Guyana's team to The Hague. What's the mood? How are things unfolding there, and what are the prospects looking like for Guyana?
Well, prospects are good. Legally, I don't think Venezuela ever had much of a case. As you recall, let's back up a bit. All of these things, like the mixed commission, the good officer process, were instruments designed to resolve this matter peacefully. The good officer process went on for 25 years. Ralph Ramkaran, Barton, Scotland, the Jamaican professor whose name eludes me at the present time, they were all good officers. But I think before the PVP departed the government, I think sometime in 2015, I think they too would come to the conclusion that a good officer process was not doing what it's supposed to do. It was not bringing the two countries closer to a solution. Is that at that point, based on Article 33, not Article 33, yes, Article 33 of the UN Charter, they then decided to ask the UN Secretary General to intervene in the matter. And as you remember, I think round about 2016, both Maduro and President Granger met at the UN and agreed to extend the good officer process and then to engage for 1 year in what is called the enhanced good officer process, which was led by a man called Doug Nylander, I think his name was. And he spent a year going around talking to both Venezuela and Ghana. And I think they both reached Venezuela and Ghana, decided that the best thing to do is to refer the matter back to the Secretary General, who was then Ban Ki-moon.
Yes.
Ban Ki-moon looked at it and he arrived at the decision that the best thing to do is to refer this matter to the ICJ. To the best of my recollection, Venezuela agreed to that decision, and he therefore referred the matter to the ICJ, and both Guyana and Venezuela had to submit what was called memorials. That is an outline of your position on the border controversy. We did so, I think, in 2018, and Venezuela immediately reverted to its usual tricks. It said the court had no jurisdiction. The court considered Venezuela's objection, and in I think it was December of 2020, the court ruled that in fact it did have jurisdiction to hear the case. I hope it is understood when I say to hear our case, the court was asked to look at the validity of the 1899 award and
right.
therefore the legality and authority of the boundaries between the two countries. Well, Venezuela, after the ICJ said it had jurisdiction to hear the matter, they then had to submit a memorial. I don't know why we're surprised when they go into the Coyuni and say they're looking for mining and so on. They give some of the most elementary reasons, transparently deceptive reasons for things we're doing. They've been doing it with the legal process. After the court said Ghana has jurisdiction and they had to submit the memorial, they then said the foreign minister wrote and said that they're not submitting any memorial. They're now going to object to the admissibility of our submission, which was the second objection. That is the one that
Well, it's rather interesting that Venezuela on the legal front first said they weren't going to participate in the process.
Yeah.
Then said the court has no jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Then reverted to making submissions. But what they're doing now, physically, seems to be moving the goalpost from the judicial side into a more physical, confrontational side by putting troops on the border and so on, because they've made it clear that, look, we're not going to accept any decision of the International Court of Justice. Do you, in fact, see, like some citizens do, that the troop buildups on our borders speak to a Venezuelan position as an alternative to the court decisions?
Well, I first of all, I would suggest that whether it's moving the troops or engaging in all of these fandangles with the legal process and so on, it's all part of a multi-pronged strategy. That's what the Venezuelans do. What is troubling, I think you might have noticed, is that the National Assembly has now voted to put a referendum to the country as to what they should do with the border controversy. And some of the questions they're asking the Venezuelan people to look at: one, is to withdraw from the ICJ. Two, whether they should use military means to get back to Essequibo. And I think three, whether the peaceful pursuit of their claim to the Esquibo should continue. Now, as we said at the beginning, and I repeat for the sake of my own compatriots, it is about time we took this matter a bit more seriously. This country should be afire. Our hair should be on fire. But some of the recent developments on the border and what's going on within Venezuela. When I pick up a newspaper or I look at the social media outlets and so on, I don't see the kind of robust presentation of what the Venezuelans are doing and what is the likely response from our government. I'm willing to wager right now, if you went outside as we leave here this afternoon, and the first person you meet in front of Congress Place, you ask that person, what are we doing in relation to Venezuela? And do you know what the Venezuelans are proposing to do with the border controversy? And see what answer you get.
No one knows. Now, in the 1980s, Venezuela had an educational policy that said Esquibo belonged to Venezuela in the schools,
Yes.
elementary right through.
Yes.
This is a fact. Exercise books had cover pictures of the map of Venezuela with an addendum of Esquibo.
Yeah.
In shaded lines and so on. So people were literally indoctrinated regarding this Esquibo issue. And I remember being in Venezuela in 1985 when Mr. Barnum died. I went for a visit with relatives. And there were youngsters running through the streets saying, "We going for Esquibo, your president dead, and we go in and collect our land," and so on and so on. So this thing is in the psyche. It's etched within the psyche of every Venezuelan citizen that Esquibo belongs to them. And it is what they're doing. Now, given that background, there is a date now for the referendum. It's the 3rd of December.
3rd of December 3rd, yes.
So when that referendum becomes a reality and people go out for the vote, it is on the basis of what they've been educated. It is on the basis of what they now believe through the education they receive that they're going to answer those questions.
Remember how we began, is that they're pursuing this thing with great seriousness,
Yes.
great purpose, great intention, as compared to what we're doing here in there.
At the moment, anyway.
Yes, they never stop. They have indoctrinated several generations to believe that Esquibo was theirs. I could give you the entire wealth I own, which is not much. And I can tell you that there's no government in Venezuela in its right mind which can drop the claim to the Esquibo. It can't.
I agree with you. But I wanted to raise this other point. It is evident that the Venezuelan governments of recent vintage have resorted to resurrecting this claim to Esquibo. Generally when they're in political trouble,
Yes.
generally when they're on the verge of being ousted from government, generally when there's instability and there seems to be some level of rejection by the voting masses of Venezuela, which has a population of about 29 million people, I believe. So they throw sort of red meat at the population and say, look, we go in and get this thing, and when we get this thing, you'll be more comfortable. And so it is almost the carrot and the stick that is politically used to rein in Venezuelan discomfort with the governments.
Yeah, but it's a great unifying factor in Venezuela. And I hope it is appreciated by our bosses and the powers that be in this country, that the opposition in Venezuela is more strident and moderate than the Maduro administration.
Which leads me to the next question. There's a joint team that is pursuing this matter on Guyana's behalf. Joint meaning government and opposition. At The Hague, you were part of the team representing the parliamentary opposition. Mr. Cargonage is an agent named on the Guyana side of this issue. The border, yes. The border case before the ICJ.
If you leave agent just hanging like that.
Yeah, border agent. I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon, sir. I beg your pardon, sir. So, Mr. Greenwich is Guyana's border agent, one of two, I believe.
Yes.
And so there's a semblance of unity at that level in
Yeah.
dealing with this matter. What is your sense of the unity of purpose at the other level, the parliamentary level in Guyana? I know we agree on the importance of such unity, but what are your views on where we are now with respect to this unity? The leader of the opposition has made it very clear, and other spokespersons for the opposition also have made it clear that we are united with the government on this. But there seem to be little or no reaching out on the part of the government to engage the opposition in a meaningful way to discuss this issue and map or chart a way forward. For example, the relevant committees of parliament have not yet been activated, and the Venezuelans are continuing their onward purposeful drive to realize their own ambitious targets.
No, I think you raised a very profound point. Being what I am, a result of my education and background, I don't think it is sufficient for there to only to be unity when there's a crisis. For example, why isn't I don't know what is it. It used to be the parliamentary committee on the controversy. We had it in the 80s. It was revived, and it's now part of the sectoral committees.
There's a national, I believe, defense committee or something of that.
Well, you see, I hope
security. I think it's national security. Yeah.
I hope it is not a case where they use these things tactically and politically, for a particular purpose or an end. That should be an instrument in which the opposition can be pulled in and be involved, because whether you like it, whether it is liked or not by this government or any other government for that matter, when it comes to the border controversy, when it comes to the knowledge, understanding, and experience of this matter, the PNC has an unrivaled position, And I don't know why the administration doesn't take advantage of what it is known. A lot of us have been dealing with the border controversy for most of our lives. I entered the Foreign Ministry in 1973. In 2023, I was still dealing with the same border controversy, which was handed to me as the first issue when I joined the Foreign Service. As a matter of fact, when you joined the Foreign Service in those days, there was a little package they gave you with all of the speeches, the treaties, and the understandings that had been reached between Guyana and Venezuela. That is how you started out at the Foreign Ministry. My first encounter with the current Minister of Foreign Affairs, first and only encounter this country, Foreign Affairs, I tried to say to him that whatever you do in Guyana, economically, culturally, politically, anything otherwise, there's one issue which will overhang and dominate whatever you're doing in this country, as long as we are a state. That is the border controversy. It's not something you can ever believe in your own mind that a single party or government can handle it effectively and efficiently. It has to be a cooperative exercise involving not only the opposition, but the people of this country. And the way you involve the people of this country, you have to educate them and bring them along with what is going on.
I refer to unity at the level of the ICJ and representation and so on. But I must make this point for the viewing and listening public. Your addition to that team was only as a result of some pressure to involve the opposition. There was no reaching out by the government to say, let's include the opposition.
Yeah, that's what I heard. And what I also found troubling is that when we came back and the Minister of Foreign Affairs made a statement, and I regret that the Minister of Foreign Affairs I served knew where the water's edge was when it comes to politics. Is that you don't attack the foreign ministry or the staff of the foreign ministry or people who are members of a delegation. And the current foreign minister got up in parliament and said that they asked for somebody and the person was not intelligent or educated enough. And therefore, he did not say they sent me. He didn't mention my name, but he was talking about the young lady who's in charge of foreign affairs, Amanda Desir. But we don't do that. In any case, he has no right to tell the People's National Congress who should represent the People's National Congress in The Hague. That is not in his remit as Minister of Foreign Affairs. And that had a sober note, even though in The Hague, I think, along with Mr. Shearer and Attorney General Nandelat, we functioned quite effectively. When I got back, that is sober note I found.
Well, the leadership of the People's National Congress is of the view that Mr. Todd is a misfit for the position of Minister of Foreign Affairs, but that's not part of our conversation. Mr. Ali, when this issue got all heated, this controversy got all heated a week or so ago, issued a statement to the effect that he had brought to the attention of international leaders the relevant information regarding where we were and the buildup of troops on the Venezuelan side, as well as the Venezuelan statement, which suggested rather that they were there to remove illegal miners and stop illegal mining operations. He, Mr. Ali, said that he brought this information to international leaders. Is that where you stop? And secondly, given the Petro-Caribbean deal that we know about and the impact it has on people, leaders such as the Prime Minister of Barbados and St. Vincent and the Grenadines in particular, and the fact that we know that these relations between Venezuela and these countries, and as you have pointed out as well, seem to be a kind of a hobble when it comes to openly and directly supporting Guyana's cause.
Yeah.
How effective do you see Mr. Ali's letters to these international leaders without follow-up? Well, at least we do not know of any follow-up action up to this time.
You know, could I take over your role as interviewer and ask you a question? Do you know what Mr. Ali said in those letters that went out to the Caribbean? Does the average citizen
we don't know.
But that's what I'm talking about. So how are you going to mobilize this population? I've read in very general terms that he wrote different people and let them know what's going on in the borders, except the Guyanese citizens. In these circumstances, a national broadcaster would have been the obvious thing to do. Bring the Guyanese people
up to scratch. Well, Parliament was due to be reconvened, I believe, on the 10th of October. Today is the 22nd of October. Parliament has not been reconvened. There's no motion on the table to discuss this issue when the Venezuelans on the other side have not only presented but passed a resolution to go to referendum and have gone the further step of setting a date for the referendum and presenting the questions to the populace. On the other hand, the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, the Parliament has not been convened. There's no statement from the Minister of Foreign Affairs. There is no statement from the President, who is Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and Head of State and Government. It is growing more and more evident that the People's Progressive Party might have lost its way in this matter, or is altogether not taking it as seriously as they need to. It means, therefore, that these missing elements and the other missing element of an national educational program in schools, in the public spaces, need to get somehow to the attention of the government as being absolutely necessary steps to be taken by.
Well, I think one good thing I see, Ms. Desir has issued a statement calling for the parliamentary committee, security committee.
I think it's security. Not sure what is the title of it.
Yeah, yes, to be convened. But I agree with you. I can tell you there are moments in the 80s by the constant, persistent threats and the consequences of those threats from Venezuela. After a while, it wears you down. Wears the government down. They might have the resources now, but they will discover that Venezuela is going to use every platform, every forum to drum up support for their cause. And you will have to deploy your resources too to come to the Venezuelans. And that could be, especially for a foreign ministry, a very draining exercise. And the last thing I would say, based on what I know about the foreign ministry, both before, when I left in 1998 and when I returned in 2015, I am not so sure it's currently structured to cope with the emerging challenges we are getting from Venezuela.
And here's the trouble. Here's the trouble. Venezuela's population is almost 30 times ours.
Yeah.
The size and strength of Venezuelan military is almost half, if not more than half, of Guyana's population.
Mm.
The military equipment that Venezuela started procuring since the early 2006, 8, around then, when fighter jets were being procured and were being flown over Guyana territory and so on.
Mm.
We are clearly no military match.
Yeah.
And if we recognize that, then we need to go on the offensive diplomatically.
Yes, yes.
And we need to also go on the offensive educationally.
Mm.
But given where we are, there seems to be a paucity of effort in both regards, on both fronts.
You know,
where does that leave us as
I
a
must
people?
congratulate you. I think you're reading my mind, because one of the things I wanted to discuss with you this morning is that we are too much in a defensive posture when it comes to the current developments in the border controversy. We should be, as you said just now, in diplomatic terms, leading the fight out there before they have time to formulate policy like deploying troops and so on. We should have them defending, and we have won diplomatically when we put them on the defensive. But as it is right now, everything that happened is a reaction from us. You know, the thing in The Hague, the objection, everything we have been reacting to, every development for the past, decade.
Ambassador Ronald Austin, CCH, I want to thank you very much for joining me here on Nation Watch. It's a pity that time has run out on us. I believe that this is a conversation worthy of being continued. I believe that the People's National Congress reform has a national obligation to step up where the government of Guyana is clearly failing and offer information that allows the Guyanese population to be better informed on this particular issue and to rekindle this whole nationalistic outlook where patriotism leads the way. I want to thank you very much, sir, once again for joining me and sharing these last 57 or 8 minutes with our viewing public. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Nation Watch. Nation Watch is a production of the People's National Congress Reform. We come to you live from Congress Place to Fire. And thank you very much for joining and staying with us throughout this conversation. Until we meet again next Sunday, by God's grace, be safe.
As Guyana sits on the economic and political crossroads, we speak to the nation's opinion leaders and decision makers to get their views on the challenges the country faces and the path it must take to achieve national development. Welcome to Nation Watch. Now here is your host, Mervyn Williams, former member of the Guyana Parliament